something I wish I'd known far sooner in this process of healing and awakening is that the mind is a very poor tool for healing the matters of the heart. When it comes to that necessary direct contact with those long buried, heavily repressed, painful emotions that we buried for a reason. They're highly uncomfortable, agonizing at times. The mind is just straight up the wrong tool for the job. Now, I have to be very clear here, and as something of a disclaimer, the mind is a useful tool for the areas around this process. We may, in fact, need the mind to direct us to this healing space in the first place. After all, it takes some level of cognition and mind activity to hear the words I'm speaking now. And the mind is necessary, especially in the early days of perhaps a therapy, a kind of talking therapy you may be engaged in, or a counseling therapy. Very powerful and very important. So this is not to say those things are irrelevant or redundant or not useful. This is not a disparaging or a dismissal of therapeutic input. It's necessary and it's powerful. It begins to turn the light up on the darkness and can illuminate the mind to something that it's been trying to avoid. And the mind is a necessary tool for reorganizing and restructuring our lives in light of the new awareness that you have developed as you have become aware of the origin of so much of your struggles in adult life, as you have become aware of the past events and the previous relationships with people that have damaged your emotional health, that have caused the emotional well-being of your individual expression of life to shrink and contract, to become twisted and knotted up. To function incorrectly. As you become aware of these events, these situations, and these people, and understanding cognitively the reasons for why things haven't been healthy or smooth for you in your life, the mind is then necessary to restructure and reorganize. For example, you may decide that certain people don't actually have a place in your life. And if you have never considered that, I would invite you to consider that. think, is that person that hurts me so much, that relentlessly invalidates me, makes me feel bad about myself, insults me, devalues me, is there a reason they're still in my life? Oh, I guess not. See ya. You have the power to do this. You do. Don't let anybody tell you that you don't. Anyone saying you can't do that, well, that comes from a very manipulative place, a Machiavellian place. Maybe you need the mind to reorganize, restructure, and say, well, I know certain relationships aren't particularly healthy, but it's not quite at the level of a full cutting off. Maybe that's not the right approach. You have this power too. Congratulations. You may choose with a calm, rational, reasoned, cognitive understanding that actually it's not so much about a cutting off and a leaving. It's not about pulling the disappearing act, which you could pull. Right? It's your choice, your power to do that if you wish. But you may also decide maybe that's not the approach I'm going to take for this particular relationship. And then cognitively understanding it's not about changing the other person. And it's not about changing yourself. What it's about is changing the relationship. There is tremendous power in that knowledge. A lot of our frustration and feelings of futility on this path come from trying to change the wrong part. Trying to change things that can't be changed. You can't change people. And changing yourself is quite a slow process. And you're not nearly as involved in it as you might think you are. But what you do have the power to change always is the nature of the relationship that you have with other people, that you have with yourself, that you have with the world around you. So cognition, meaning thinking, can be very important when it comes to this process of healing and awakening. Information, knowledge. It may suit your individual temperament to utilize an academic book learning, to create a structure and framework with which you feel comfortable to approach the emotional work. Nothing wrong with that. That was me, by the way. That's what I did. I had that very yang energy mind, right? That needs to know. The magician needed to know the precise rules and structures and what are the studies. I need the data. Very yang. So that I can build and construct and change and alter and have something solid and tangible. And it was remarkably powerful and very necessary. I had talking therapy as well, and that was very useful, very powerful. But I made a fundamental error. Perhaps because this is so unknown, so unspoken about. in our general world culture. And I've long since given up trying to find the reason for why that is. But it just is the case. You just won't hear this from many sources. One moment. Yum. What I wish I'd known sooner is that to get to the root of the issue and actually to heal the issue is not a cognitive process, which is a terrifying prospect to the mind-identified individual and to the individual who not only values cognition, thinking, to a great extent, but also uses cognition as a barrier to prevent feeling these things in the first place. Again, that was me. The very framework that I had constructed in order to better understand my emotions started to become the castle walls behind which I hid from my emotions. Does that make you feel nervous? Does that make you feel uncomfortable? Good. That's a good sign when we're beginning to approach this shadow space. Instabilnus invenitur, a Latin phrase meaning you will find it in the filth. You will find it in the cesspit. What is it that you will find? The gold that you have been searching for your entire life, the very peace, the treasure that we long for, that we seek. You will find it in the dirt. So that is why we must have courage to face these things. And if we feel nervous, that is not a sign to run away, it's a sign to press on. The very framework, the cognitive understanding that I was using to navigate towards this deeper emotional self, this deeper emotional healing, suddenly became the method I used to avoid. Because thinking is all up here. And we can kind of hide within it. We can kind of hide within narratives, within stories. It's a method of keeping things at arm's length. A method of residing comfortably in the heart of the problem itself. And it's not about being comfortable. In order to heal, we have to face the uncomfortable. My mind really doesn't like me talking about this stuff, so bear with me. You will have encountered this phenomena when you understand something intellectually to a precise, logically satisfying extent. You understand something cognitively to the extent you'd be able to write an academic paper on the subject, you'd be able to explain it to people. You know it cognitively. But there's something just unsatisfying about the conclusions that you've drawn. Have you experienced that in healing or in awakening? You say, yeah, I get it. I get it. I understand how my parents' behaviour affected me, and even come to a place where you go, and I also understand that they behaved in that way because of the conditioning that they received. And I understand why the world is the way it is, and I understand why people treat me the way they treat me. I understand all of this. I understand my own reactions. I understand my own emotions. I understand all of this. I get it. I do. I've figured it out. It all makes perfect sense. Total clarity. I get all of this. So why do I still feel so awful? Have you encountered that phenomena? No matter how many therapy sessions you go to, no matter how many difficult conversations you have with the people that really need to have those conversations, no matter how much you try to restructure and reorganize your life, you just know something just doesn't feel right. You don't feel like you're healing. It's quite a demoralizing state to be in. It can lead you to despair if you don't know what's happening. It can make you feel very frustrated. It's akin to, if you go into the kitchen and it stinks in there, and in order to get rid of the stink, you open the windows, you start spraying air freshener everywhere, and it still stinks. And that's akin to going around your life noticing something's off. So this stink here is a metaphor for those nasty negative emotions that we'd rather not feel, and they seem to come up out of nowhere. You can't, like, what, you're having a good day at work, but all of a sudden you just feel so low, like your battery's just been taken out. You feel anxious for no reason, stressed for no reason, depressed for no reason, heavy, dark. And then all of a sudden, completely elated again, you feel relieved, and then right back into that darkness. Strange. That's the stink in the kitchen. And so you decide, actually, this air freshener, so the air freshener and opening the window, that's like doing all these very surface level things that you that you learn from Instagram to deal with your mental health. Why don't you just have a nice bubble bath? You know, why don't you go for a walk? That's always such a helpful one to hear, isn't it? Oh yeah, go for a walk. Hadn't thought of that. Oh, have a bubble bath. Yeah, hadn't thought of that. Give me a break. Have a little treat. Why don't treat yourself to a little bar of chocolate? Let your hair down. Yeah, that's opening the window and spraying air freshener. It seems to kind of work to a very superficial level. Very superficial, but it just ain't. Eventually, you get fed up with all that. I think this thing that I'm dealing with, it goes above the pay grade of a bubble bath, right? We're going to need to let's put Mr. Matey back on the shelf for a moment, and we'll maybe this is slightly beyond the capabilities of Mr. Matey. Mr. Matey is a brand of bubble bath, by the way, for my American listeners. Cheers. So the surface level ain't working. The air freshener opening the window ain't working. The stink just keeps coming back. So you very rightly go to a therapist. Or whatever that, obviously I'm coming from the background of quite a scientific, atheistic point of view. That was my background previously. And in the Western world, I live in England, so that's just, that's the current framework. But for you, it might manifest in a very different way. You might be in a more of a spiritual kind of culture, and instead of going to see a therapist, you went to see a priest or a shaman. These are just different ways of looking at it. In our modern culture, doctors are the modern equivalent of a shaman. A witch doctor. I'm telling you. And the therapist is like the wise person who lives in the woods. They're the people you go to when... The people that you go... There's always been these people. The people that you go to when you have a problem of the heart, you have a problem of the spirit. Spirit comes from the word spiros, which means breath. It's not a word to be confused about or feel like it's all off in away with the fairies. The word spirit just comes from the word breath, our essential life force. When you have a problem of the spirit, you would go and visit the wise person in the woods, the shaman, the herbalist, the witch. But in our modern culture, it's a therapist or a counsellor. And that's akin to trying to get to the root. Trying to get to the root of where's all this stink coming from? Why does it keep resurfacing despite my best efforts to clear it away? So you go to somebody who can help you to point out the bin is full. You may not have been aware of this, you may not have noticed this, but maybe you've been taking out other bins, but there's one bin in the corner you've been neglecting, you've forgotten about, and you just don't think about it. And a good therapist and counsellor directs you to those areas of yourself, your emotional self, that you have been neglecting. And says, time to take out the bin. Let's take it out. And working with you, they can cognitively direct you towards those areas of yourself that are causing this pain to continue to manifest in your life. So you take the bin out. And there's often a period of time in which you suddenly feel so much more elated because there's far less of that stink, far less of that smell. So you've gotten rid of the bin, now you've cleaned the bin, and hey, we're good, right? We're good. Until one day, you come down into the kitchen, in this metaphor as you're going about your life, and the stink has returned. Bro! After all that work, after all that fighting, after all that striving, after all that struggle, after pouring all those resources, mentally, emotionally, financially, time, energy, money, everything you poured into, I thought I'd taken the bin out. So you check, the bin's empty. I don't get this. How can there still be a stink? Thought we'd fixed this. It's just coffee today. The honey and lemon is no more, as my sore throat seems to have healed. So, how has this stink returned, and how do we finally get this stink gone for good? Well, the first thing is not to despair, because a lot of people, upon the return of the stink, go, right, that's it. It's just a facet of life. It's just a part of life. There's nothing you can do about it. It's just going to come back again and again. I've just got to get on with it. I've just got to put up with it. No. Not the right approach. We want to live stink-free, I'm afraid. We need clear, fresh air at all times. You can have it. It's your birthright. So, what needs to be done here? Forget the bin. Instead, we get down on the floor and we have to look underneath all of the cupboards, underneath the fridge, underneath the freezer, underneath the oven, underneath all of the drawers, underneath any tables, underneath all of it. And that is where we need to sometimes slide the hand in and have a feel around. Find where the grime is. Insta-killness in Veneter. And it's gonna be grim. Grim. Because you thought the bin was disgusting, right? But underneath, this is beyond the tiles, right? We're laying on the tiles, but underneath, we're trying to reach our hand underneath and grope around in the dark to try and find where that something is there that is rotting. There's something in there that is festering, something disgusting. And as you reach around, you're feeling creepy crawlies, right? The silverfish. Ugh. Trigger warning if you don't like insects, by the way. Maybe a bit late on that, but the cockroach, the spider, the maggot, this is the realm. That's the realm that we're working in now. This is the realm of the fungus. This is the realm of bacteria. This is the realm of the insect swarm. This is the nest. This is where you find the nests, right? In the filth. Where we find that, that is where we are going to find the source of the stink. As you rifle around underneath everything, even underneath the bin, there you will find the grime. And we need to do a deep, deep clean. Maybe we even need to pick the cupboards up, move everything out of the kitchen, so we can go scorched earth, bleach everything. And as you uncover, you will find so many little pockets of, like, I don't know why this metaphor, why this in particular. It's like an orange. Like many Christmases ago, an orange fell and rolled underneath a cupboard and you didn't notice it and forgot about it. And that orange has been there for years, and that is the stink. When it dropped and fell, it was a beautifully sweet, ripe orange, good for eating. Now, years later, because it fell into the shadow and was forgotten about, now it is moulded. It is festering. And the festering stink is causing that vapor to rise up and out, and that is the stink. Side note, so stay with me, just to let you in a little bit to late stage healing, late stage awakening and realization. One of the principles for me just then, this is Zen in the field now. We caught something as it happened, right? So I'm just going to let you into my process as it's literally just happened. That orange, the thing about the orange falling and rolling under, I hadn't planned that. There was no, that came from somewhere, and the orange has never been a thing for me. I've never had that metaphor before. Why an orange? There must be, that orange must be an unconscious symbol. There must be something in that as a symbol in itself. Why an orange? It could have been anything. Could have been an apple, could have been a sausage roll, could have been a sausage, could have been anything. Why did my mind choose orange as a symbol? Now, to me, that's the white rabbit to follow down the rabbit hole. So after I've done this video, I'm going to have a real deep meditate on what the symbol of the orange, what does the orange represent? It must be, because that's something my mind has presented, that symbol, as a clue to my own deeper nature. There must be something deep in the emotional health of this individual expression of an individual body, mind, and narrative. The orange somehow has significance, and I was previously unaware of that. So that is shadow material that has been brought to the surface. There must be some kind of orange somewhere that's fallen into the shadow. How interesting. Just information. So, that is what I wish I'd known sooner. Because I took out the bin and then was running around for years and years thinking I'd fixed the problem because I took the bin out. But there were deeper, creepy crawlies. No matter how much you clean the surface, no matter how many bins you take out, you've got to get underneath the cupboards. So how does this relate to the mind being a poor tool for dealing with the deeper aspects of our emotional well-being, the shadow stuff? And the shadow stuff is the underneath the cupboards where you can't reach it with your sight, you've got to feel it, right? That's the beauty. Again, that metaphor, I didn't really plan that, but there it is. It's beautiful. Because to clean underneath the cupboards, to clean underneath the oven, your sight doesn't get there. So in this metaphor, that's your mind. Your mind doesn't reach that far. Your mind doesn't reach that far. That's why it's not working. That's why the mind is the poor tool for getting into the shadow space, because when it's the deep, dark stuff, the mind just cannot penetrate that far. But something can penetrate that far. Your hand, as your hand reaches underneath, and we grope around in there, you come into contact with the felt sense of what's going on. And sometimes it'll be a creepy crawly, nasty. Sometimes it'll be squidgy, slimy and horrible, nasty. But this is how we're going to pull all of that stuff out. Out, out, out. Pull it out and clean it up. I want to explain why the mind doesn't go that far. And I'm going to do this using the framework, using the language of the most powerful spiritual practice of all, the scientific method. If you pursue the scientific method, the scientific understanding far enough, you will arrive at enlightenment. The mind, as we have come to understand it, especially in the spiritual circles, when we're looking at trying to find inner peace, the mind is for some reason becomes like the enemy to our inner peace. The mind, I'm going to approach this from an evolutionary biology perspective, as well as from the spiritual perspective. We're trying to create a quiet mind. When we're trying to come to inner peace, stillness, awakening, enlightenment, once the mind subsides, true understanding can arise. True knowledge, a true depth of understanding into the real nature of the universe. But the mind actually has to subside. So what is the mind? In terms of the evolutionary biology of things, the mind as we experience it is the neocortex. The neocortex deals with our logic, our cognition, our thinking, our rationality, our reasoning, and our mental imaging, the images that we create and the narratives that we create. All of that stuff, all of the stuff that in the spiritual circles we're trying to get rid of, we're trying to silence, is the neocortex. Now the word neo means new. Let's let that sink in for a sec. Cheers. Yummy. Neocortex. And the clues are in language everywhere, aren't they? And in our culture. So you know Neo from the Matrix, right? The one that awoke. The one. One is an anagram of Neo, by the way. Anagram? If you rearrange the letters of Neo, you get one. Neo is the one who woke up. New. Neo. That's why when people say, like, people say Neo Advaita, they mean new Advaita, and that's wrong, apparently. But Neo means new, and neocortex means the new cortex, the fresh cortex. And why that is important is because we have to understand that at some point during our evolution as the primate species on Earth, as we stood up on our hind legs, and that gave us access to using our hands and, most importantly, using our opposable thumbs, we developed a part of the brain that was able to think in terms of logic, able to think in terms of rationality, able to create images, able to predict a future, able to analyze the past, right? The neocortex can do all of that, which was a remarkably powerful tool. And so in many ways, the moment we had a neocortex, our physical, biological evolution ceased. Why? Because suddenly we could make tools. And there's no point everybody running after a deer to try and get it in a headlock to bring it down when you can just throw a spear. Right? Because we could predict and rationalize and use the neocortex to manipulate the physical world in front of us. And as soon as we had that, I mean, we survived because the matey boy who figured out to sharpen the end of the stick, and now he can bring down deer after deer after deer because he's the one who figured that out, well, that fella's going to get a lot of chicks, right? So that's Darwin's theory of evolution in a nutshell right there. We made spears so the guys could get chicks. Why am I saying all of this? Well, the point here, as it relates to the mind relating to emotion, is that the neocortex is exactly that. New. The neocortex is very recent, very, 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 very recent in our history. So all of this cognition, all of even our language, even our ability to perceive things in terms of narrative, prediction of future, analyzing the past, all of those things is very recent. Okay? So emotion came way, 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 way before that. Way before the neocortex. We felt emotion far, far before we had a name for the emotion. Way before. The world of emotion as it exists in your body is related to much deeper systems. The limbic system and the midbrain. This is the world that we often refer to as like our primal stuff, our primal selves. And The neocortex obviously looks at all the primal stuff and kind of wants to say that's archaic, we're past all of that now. Well, the neocortex would say that, wouldn't it? Because it's clever and it knows everything. But we have to understand that is the precise reason why the mind and cognition doesn't reach as far as our deeper emotional selves. That is why. Now that's one way of talking about it. There are many, right? If we were to look at more of the spiritual stuff, we might speak more in terms of karma from past lives. You understand your ancestors? We're looking at our ancestors, our limbic system, our primal selves, the emotions. That's the deeper stuff in the long buried past. And in certain Indian traditions, they might talk about something called vasanas, which is like an emotional energy pattern and a cognitive thinking pattern and a behavior pattern. Now vasanas it's been in the Sanskrit way before science came along. How interesting is that? They knew all of this stuff anyway. It's just a different way of talking about things. So I use the scientific method there, as that's just the language that I'm more proficient in speaking about these things with. But we've got to understand, these are just different ways of talking about the same thing. Are we talking about karma? Are we talking about samskaras? Are we talking about vasanas? Are we talking about generational trauma? Are we talking about the Freudian and the Jungian psychiatric approaches to shadow and libido? We're talking about all of it. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. What's important is understanding the mind does not reach that far. So this is why, no matter how much reasoning you do, no matter how much thinking, no matter how much cognition, and no matter how much you try to change things in your life, although you feel like you're doing something, it never quite gets to the deepest part of the shadow. The neocortex came way later on in the game. So it's actually a massive relief. A massive relief. And you might, on some level, think, isn't this too good to be true? It's not, it's kind of a double-edged sword, because for one thing, good, you can forget about all of these arguments that you keep having in your head. You can forget about that constant replaying of what you should have said to so-and-so, that argument you had years ago, I should have said this, I should have said that. And if this happens again, I'm going to say this and I'm going to say that. That's all neocortex activity, right? Remembering the past, predicting the future. Neocortex, neocortex, neocortex. It's exhausting and it only creates suffering. That's all that ever ends up happening if we get too lost in the neocortex activity. So, that was part 3 in this series on emotion work, something I just wanted to explain and describe in great detail. In episode 4, we're going to get deep into a deep session of how to get underneath those skirting boards, underneath the cupboards, underneath the fridge, underneath the freezer, and we're not going to engage the mind in order to do any of this stuff. So we can relax a little. Right? It's good news. It's good news. The good news part is that we can forget about the mind activity. We can forget about that. The bad news is we're going to have to go sweeping around in the creepy crawlies and the horrible bit. But trust me, once we get there, once we've cleaned out that mouldy old orange from underneath the cupboards, we're going to be able to enjoy fresh, clean air for the rest of your life. Thank you so much for watching. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe on the way out, and you can join channel memberships. It's one of these buttons down here if you want to gain access to my exclusive guided meditations and talks and continue to support me in my work. And all that, I'm really so grateful for all of the channel members so far. You are allowing me to put more time, effort and energy into producing these videos and helping me to upgrade all of my equipment. So a massive thank you for that. Hope you're well out there, team. Take care, be well, and stay present.